My name is Madison Greene. The moment my family finally broke me didn't happen with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet, venomous whisper over a video call. My mother's face, pixelated on my laptop screen, twisted into a familiar sneer. "Your sister wired us $10,000 this month. A little something to help out," she said, her eyes finding mine. "What have you done?" "Nothing. You're useless." The word hung in the air, cold and heavy. I opened my mouth, a desperate, strangled sound forming in my throat, ready to finally tell them the truth. But before I could speak, my father's voice barked from beside her, sharp and final. "Don't even start, Madison. Conversation over." And just like that, I was erased. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment, where are you watching from? Growing up in our perfectly manicured suburban home in Denver felt like living in a theater where my older sister, Victoria, was the star of every show, and I was the stagehand nobody noticed. It wasn't that my parents were openly cruel back then. Their favoritism was a quieter, more insidious thing, woven into the very fabric of our lives. It was in the way they spoke about us, the way they celebrated our achievements, and the way they saw our futures. Victoria was destined for greatness. I was just there. Victoria was born shining, or so it seemed. She had bright blonde hair that fell in perfect waves and a smile that could charm anyone. She got straight A's without ever seeming to try. Her report cards hung on the refrigerator with decorative magnets. Mine, usually a mix of A's and B's earned through hours of late-night studying, were glanced at with a simple, "That's nice, honey," before being placed in a drawer. The message was clear. My hard work would never be as impressive as her natural brilliance. I remember our 10th and 12th birthdays vividly. They were 2 years apart but felt like they existed in different universes. For Victoria's 12th, my parents threw a massive pool party. They hired a DJ, ordered a 3-tiered cake from the fanciest bakery in town, and invited her entire class. She was showered with gifts, the star of the day, radiant in a new designer swimsuit. My 10th birthday was a quiet family dinner at a local pizza place. My gift was a sensible pair of running shoes because, as my mom said, "You're always wearing out your sneakers, Madison." It wasn't malicious, it was practical, but practicality felt like a consolation prize. Victoria got excitement and celebration. I got sensible things for a sensible girl. This dynamic followed us through high school. Victoria was the prom queen, the captain of the debate team, the girl everyone wanted to be. My parents reveled in her popularity. They'd boast to friends and relatives about her accomplishments, her social calendar, her bright future. "Victoria is going to be a lawyer," my dad would say, beaming with pride. "She can argue her way out of anything." Meanwhile, I found my place in quieter corners. I joined the art club and volunteered at the local animal shelter. I discovered a passion for taking care of things, for nurturing and fixing what was broken. But my passions were seen as hobbies, not ambitions. When I won a regional award for a painting I'd spent months on, my mother's reaction was lukewarm. "Oh, that's lovely, dear," she said, her eyes already scanning the mail. "Did you see Victoria's acceptance letter from Georgetown came today?" The summer I turned 16, the difference between us was cast in steel and rubber. My father came home one afternoon with a brand new convertible for Victoria. It was a surprise graduation gift, a shiny red symbol of her success. She squealed with delight, and my parents looked on as if they'd just handed her the keys to the world. I, on the other hand, had been working a grueling part-time job at a diner since I was 15, saving every dollar. When I finally saved enough to buy a beat-up 10-year-old sedan, my dad didn't celebrate. He just looked it over, kicked one of the tires, and said, "Well, at least it runs. Don't expect me to pay for the repairs." Victoria's success was their success. My independence was my own responsibility. College was the final frontier of their favoritism. Victoria's tuition at Georgetown was paid for without a second thought. It was an investment in her, in the family name. When I decided I wanted to go into nursing, a choice born from my desire to help people in a tangible way, my parents were dismissive. "Nursing?" my mother had said, a frown creasing her brow. "It's such a messy job, Madison. And the pay isn't great. Are you sure you don't want to aim a little higher?" Aim higher was code for be more like your sister. I didn't argue. I knew it was pointless. I applied for every scholarship I could find and worked 2 jobs all through my senior year of high school to save for tuition at the local state university. I was proud of myself when I got my acceptance letter, along with a significant scholarship that would cover half my costs. When I showed my parents, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. "State school, huh? Well, it's practical, I suppose." Practical. There was that word again. It was the label they'd given me, the box they'd put me in. Victoria was brilliant, ambitious, and dazzling. I was practical, quiet, and sensible. She was an investment. I was an expense to be managed. During college, the distance between us grew. Victoria would come home for holidays with stories of lavish parties and important internships in Washington, D.C. She'd bring my parents expensive gifts, a cashmere scarf for mom, a bottle of aged whiskey for dad. I would come home, exhausted, from juggling classes and my job as a certified nursing assistant, with simple, heartfelt gifts they'd accept with polite smiles. One Christmas, I used my meager savings to buy my mother a beautiful, hand-painted locket I knew she'd love. I had seen her admiring it in a boutique window months earlier. When she opened it, she smiled. A genuine, warm smile that made my heart leap. "Oh, Madison, it's beautiful." For a moment, I felt seen. Then, Victoria presented her gift. An all-expenses-paid weekend trip for them to a spa resort in the mountains. My locket was instantly forgotten. It was placed on the mantelpiece, but the spa brochure was passed around, discussed, and celebrated for the rest of the night. I wasn't jealous of Victoria's money. I was jealous of the reaction it got. Her gifts weren't just gifts. They were proof of her success, proof that she was the daughter who had made it. My efforts, my sacrifices, my thoughtful gestures, they were just nice. They were footnotes in the grand story of Victoria Greene and her wonderful parents. I learned to stop trying so hard. I learned to expect less. I built a life for myself on my own terms, funded by my own hard work. I graduated with honors, passed my nursing boards, and got a job at one of Denver's best hospitals. I was proud of what I had accomplished, but to my family, I was still the second best daughter, the practical one, the one who hadn't quite lived up to the dazzling promise of her older sister. And I was about to learn that in their eyes, practicality didn't pay the bills, at least not theirs. My life as a registered nurse was a world away from the one my family imagined for me. They pictured me in a sterile, quiet environment, a glorified helper. They didn't see the reality, the chaos, the exhaustion, the life and death decisions made in a split second. My days were a blur of 12-hour shifts, sometimes stretching into 14 or 16 when the emergency room was overflowing. I lived on black coffee and the adrenaline that came with knowing my actions directly impacted someone's life. It was a demanding, draining career, but it was mine. I found a deep, quiet pride in my work. There was a profound satisfaction in calming a frightened patient, in holding the hand of someone who was alone, in seeing the relief on a family's face when I told them their loved one was stable. These were victories my family would never understand. To them, success was measured in dollars and prestige, a corner office, a fancy title. They couldn't comprehend that my success was measured in heartbeats. I lived in a small but comfortable apartment in the city, a place I'd furnished myself with secondhand finds and a few carefully chosen pieces I'd saved up for. It was my sanctuary, a quiet space to decompress after the relentless pressure of the hospital. I was independent, and that independence was my most prized possession. I paid my bills, I was slowly chipping away at my student loans, and I even managed to put a little bit into savings each month. I wasn't rich like Victoria, but I was self-sufficient. I was standing on my own 2 feet, and that felt richer than any bank account. The one person who truly understood me was my grandmother, my mom's mom. Grandma Eleanor was a nurse herself back in her day, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp mind and a huge heart. She saw the person I was, not the person my parents compared me to. She'd call me after a long shift, not to ask for anything, but just to listen. "Tell me about your day, Maddie," she'd say, and I would. I'd tell her about the difficult cases, the small triumphs, the moments that made it all worthwhile. She never judged, never offered empty platitudes. She just listened and understood. About 2 years into my career, during one of our weekly calls, her voice sounded strained. She tried to hide it, but I could hear the fatigue, the worry. I pressed her, and she finally admitted that she was having trouble. A chronic condition she'd managed for years had worsened, and her new medications were outrageously expensive. The insurance covered some, but not all, and the copays were piling up. "I'll figure it out," she said, her voice trying for breezy but falling flat. "Don't you worry about it." But I did worry. This was the woman who had always been my rock, the one who celebrated my nursing school acceptance as if I'd gotten into Harvard. I couldn't stand the thought of her struggling, of her having to choose between medication and groceries. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table and went over my finances. It was tight, but if I cut back on a few things, eating out, my gym membership, my meager vacation fund, I could do it. I could cover the shortfall for her prescriptions. The next day, I called her pharmacy directly. I gave them my credit card information and set up an automatic payment for the remaining balance on her prescriptions each month. I asked them explicitly not to mention the payment source to her. I didn't want her to feel like a burden. I wanted it to be a silent gift, a quiet way of taking care of the one person who had always taken care of me. My life settled into a new rhythm: work, sleep, and careful budgeting. I stopped meeting friends for dinner as often, telling them I was saving up. I packed my lunches for work every day. My splurges became a new pair of comfortable nursing shoes or a textbook for a certification I was studying for. Meanwhile, my sister's life was a constant stream of glittering updates on social media. Victoria had married a wealthy investment banker and lived in a sprawling house in a gated community. Her Instagram was a curated gallery of her perfect life: weekend trips to Napa, designer handbags, charity galas, and of course, extravagant gifts for our parents. She posted a picture of the new luxury SUV she'd bought them for their anniversary, with the caption, "So happy I can spoil the two people who gave me everything, family first." My parents would share her posts, beaming. They'd call me, not to ask about my life, but to tell me about hers. "Did you see the photos from your sister's trip to Italy?" My mom would ask, her voice bubbling with excitement. That hotel looked incredible. She has such a wonderful life. They had no idea that my not-so-wonderful life was keeping their own mother healthy. They didn't see the hours I spent on my feet, the emotional weight I carried home with me, or the careful calculations I made every month to ensure my grandmother never missed a dose of her medication. My sacrifice was invisible. Victoria's generosity was a public performance, and they were her most enthusiastic audience. Once, my mother called, complaining about a minor health issue. The doctor's visit was so expensive even with insurance. She sighed dramatically. "It's just one thing after another." I bit my tongue. The words, "I know I pay for grandma's medication every month," right on the tip, but I swallowed them. It would sound like an accusation, like I was trying to compete with Victoria. It would start a fight, and I was too tired to fight. So I just said, "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom. I hope you feel better." Her response was a dismissive sigh. "It's fine. Victoria sent us some money to cover it. She's always so thoughtful." The irony was a bitter pill. My sister got praised for throwing money at a problem, while my silent, consistent, and far more meaningful contribution went completely unnoticed. They saw Victoria's checks as acts of love, but they couldn't see that my love was in every 12-hour shift I worked, every dollar I carefully set aside. They saw a number in a bank account, and I saw my grandmother's steady breathing and the light in her eyes. I just wished, for one moment, that they could see it too. The phone call came on a Tuesday night. It had been a particularly brutal day at the hospital. A multi-car pileup had flooded the ER, and I hadn't sat down for more than 5 minutes in over 12 hours. I had just gotten home, my body aching with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I'd kicked off my shoes, thrown my scrubs in the hamper, and was about to heat up some leftover pasta when my phone rang. It was my mother. I considered letting it go to voicemail. I wasn't in the mood for a conversation that would inevitably revolve around Victoria, but a small, foolish part of me still hoped that one day she might be calling just to ask how I was. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hi, Mom. Madison, how are you, sweetie?" Her voice was unusually bright, a syrupy sweet tone that immediately put me on high alert. This was her prelude voice, the one she used before she was about to ask for something. "I'm okay. Tired. Long day," I said, keeping my answers short. I opened the fridge and stared blankly at the contents. "Oh, you're always working so hard," she said, but it sounded less like a compliment and more like a critique, as if my hard work was an unfortunate, slightly embarrassing character flaw. "Listen, the reason I'm calling, your sister did the most wonderful thing." "Here we go," I thought, my shoulders slumping. I leaned against the kitchen counter, bracing myself. "She knows your father and I have been wanting to get the house repainted and do some landscaping, so she just wired us $10,000. Out of the blue! Can you believe how generous she is? I could, in fact, believe it. $10,000 was probably a rounding error for Victoria and her husband. For me, it was more than I had in my savings account. "Wow, Mom, that's really great of her." "It is," she said. And then there was a slight pause. The setup was over. The pitch was coming. And it got me thinking, we've always tried to be fair with you girls, to treat you both the same. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that a humorless laugh almost escaped my lips. I bit it back and remained silent, letting her continue. "So I was thinking," she went on, her voice now taking on a more serious, businesslike tone, "it would be really wonderful if you could match it." I froze, the container of pasta in my hand. "Match it? Mom, what are you talking about?" "Victoria's 10,000. It would be so helpful if you could send 10,000 too. Then it would be fair, you see. 20,000 would be enough to get everything done, and we could tell everyone that both our wonderful daughters helped us out." I was speechless. The sheer absurdity of the request was staggering. She wasn't asking if I could help, or if I had any money to spare. She was asking me to match my millionaire sister's casual gift, as if we were in the same financial universe. I finally found my voice, keeping it as calm and level as I could. "Mom, I can't do that. I don't have $10,000 just lying around." Her sweet tone vanished instantly, replaced by an icy chill. "What do you mean you don't have it? You're a nurse. You have a good job." "I do have a good job, but it doesn't pay what you think it does," I explained, my patience already wearing thin. "I have rent, I have student loans, I have car payments, bills. My salary is accounted for. There isn't an extra $10,000 Excuses, she snapped, the word sharp and dismissive. Victoria has expenses too, you know. She has a mortgage on that huge house. She has to maintain a certain lifestyle. But she makes it work because she cares about her family. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. And you don't. Every muscle in my body tensed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her about the money I sent to the pharmacy every month without fail. The money that was keeping her own mother alive and well. I wanted to ask her how much Victoria was contributing to Grandma's care. But I knew what would happen. She would either not believe me, or she would twist it, claiming I was trying to make Victoria look bad, or that I was lying to get out of helping them. My sacrifice would become a weapon used against me. So I took the only path I had. The truth, but not the whole truth. It's not an excuse, Mom. It's my financial reality, I said, my voice tight. I'm sorry, but I can't help you with that right now. You mean you won't help us, she retorted. If your sister can do it, why can't you? I just don't understand why you have to be so difficult. It's like you enjoy being contrary. You're just selfish, Madison. That's all it is. You only think about yourself. The word selfish hit me like a physical blow. Me, the daughter who gave up her nights and weekends to save for college. Me, the daughter who structured her entire budget around her grandmother's needs. Me, selfish? The injustice of it all burned in my chest, hot and acidic. I'm not being selfish, I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts to control it. I'm being realistic. No, you're being a disappointment, she said, coldly. I need to go. Your father and I have dinner plans. We're going out to celebrate Victoria's generosity. She hung up before I could say another word. I stood in my silent kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The dial tone buzzed, a monotonous, empty sound that echoed the hollowness I felt inside. She didn't want to understand my reality. She didn't care about my struggles or my sacrifices. She had created a narrative in her head. Victoria was the good, generous daughter, and I was the selfish, useless one. And no amount of truth was ever going to change that. I put the pasta back in the fridge, my appetite gone. That night I cried, not for the money I didn't have, but for the mother I would never have. A week after that disastrous phone call, I received a group text from my mom. Family Zoom call tonight at 7. Don't be late. The cheerful emoji felt like a slap in the face. It was her way of pretending our last conversation never happened, of sweeping the conflict under the rug so the family could maintain its perfect, glossy veneer. My first instinct was to ignore it, to claim I had to work late. The thought of facing them, of seeing their smiling faces and knowing what they really thought of me, made my stomach churn. But I knew that not showing up would only add fuel to their fire. It would be another piece of evidence for them to use against me, proof of how difficult and unloving I was. So, with a sense of dread, I texted back a simple, okay. At 6:55 p.m., I sat down at my laptop, my nursing scrubs, replaced with a simple sweater. I smoothed my hair, took a sip of water, and clicked the link. Their faces popped up on my screen. My mom and dad were sitting together on their living room couch, a framed photo of Victoria and her husband prominently displayed on the wall behind them. Victoria was in her own window, looking flawless as always, sitting in what looked like a home office with built-in bookshelves and perfect lighting. Then there was me, in my small apartment, with a plain white wall behind me. The contrast was stark. There she is, my mom chirped, her voice dripping with the same fake sweetness from the phone call. We were almost worried you wouldn't make it. Just got home, I lied, forcing a small smile. The first 10 minutes were a performance I'd seen 1,000 times. Victoria talked about a recent charity gala she had attended, describing the gowns and the influential people she'd met. My parents listened with rapt attention, interjecting with oohs and ahs at all the right moments. My father, who usually said very little, was full of questions about the powerful CEO Victoria had spoken to. They were mesmerized by her life, by the proximity to wealth and power she gave them. I stayed quiet, a silent observer in my little box on the screen. No one asked about my week. No one asked about my job. I had become part of the background, a silent audience member for the Victoria show. Then, Victoria steered the conversation exactly where I knew it was heading. She leaned into her camera with a conspiratorial smile. So, guess what? I decided to send Mom and Dad a little surprise this month. I already wired them the $10,000 for the house. It's the least I can do for the best parents in the world. She blew them a kiss through the screen. My parents preened. Oh, you shouldn't have, sweetheart, my mother gushed, though her expression said the exact opposite. You are just the most thoughtful daughter a mother could ask for. And then she turned to me. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare. The air in the virtual room shifted. It was no longer a family chat. It was a public execution, and I was the one on the chopping block. See, Madison? She spat, her voice laced with contempt. That's what real daughters do. They take care of their parents, not like you. The attack was so direct, so blatant, that it sucked the air right out of my lungs. My hands resting on my keyboard began to shake. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. a hot flush of shame and anger. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was a character assassination delivered in front of my entire family. That's not fair, I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. Victoria smirked from her window. It's not about being fair, Madison. It's about being responsible. I couldn't take it anymore. The years of being dismissed, of my sacrifices being invisible, of their blatant favoritism, it all came rushing to the surface. I had to say something. I had to defend myself. I had to tell them the one secret I had held on to for so long. My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. I have responsibilities you don't know about, I began, my gaze fixed on my mother. I've been paying for Grandma's care, but before I could finish the sentence, before I could explain about the medications, the pharmacy bills, the reason my finances were so tight, my father cut me off. His voice was like a whip crack, sharp, loud, and utterly dismissive. Don't make excuses, Madison, he barked, his face a mask of anger. We're not interested in your stories. This conversation is done. We don't need your drama tonight. The finality in his tone was absolute. He didn't just interrupt me, he invalidated my entire existence. My truth was an excuse. My reality was drama. And then, the most painful part happened. They just moved on, as if I hadn't spoken at all. My father turned to Victoria and asked her about her husband's latest stock market win. Victoria, without missing a beat, launched into a story, laughing and gesturing animatedly. My mother laughed along with her, her earlier anger completely gone, replaced by adoration for her perfect daughter. I sat there, frozen, my half-finished sentence hanging in the digital air. They were talking and laughing, their faces bright on my screen, while I was trapped in my silent little box, completely and utterly alone. They hadn't just ignored me, they had erased me. And in that moment, I knew that whatever love I thought they had for me was conditional, and I had failed to meet the conditions. I was useless to them. And for the first time, I started to believe that was a good thing. My father's words, "This conversation is done. We don't need your drama tonight," didn't just end my sentence. They slammed a door in my face, leaving me on the outside looking in. The shock was a physical thing, a cold wave that washed over me, leaving me numb and paralyzed in my chair. I watched, a spectator to my own humiliation, as the screen in front of me continued to display their happy, oblivious faces. Victoria, not missing a beat, launched into an amusing story about her husband's failed attempt at baking sourdough bread. She waved her hands, her diamond wedding ring catching the light from her perfectly illuminated office. My mother let out a peal of laughter, a sound so genuine and carefree it made my stomach twist into a knot. My father was smiling, a rare, relaxed smile that he never, ever directed at me. They had moved on. In the space of 5 seconds, I had gone from being a family member to being a piece of furniture, a silent witness to a life I was no longer a part of. I should have left the call. I should have clicked the red "Leave Meeting" button and reclaimed my dignity. But I couldn't. It was like watching a car crash. I was horrified, but I couldn't look away. I needed to see it through to the end. I needed to absorb the full, undiluted truth of my position in this family. So I stayed, my microphone muted, my face a blank mask. I watched them for 10 more minutes. 10 minutes of my life I'll never get back, where I watched my sister recount details of her upcoming trip to Hawaii, my mother offering packing suggestions, and my father asking about the stock market. Not once did they look at my little box on the screen. Not once did they acknowledge my continued presence. It was the most profound invisibility I had ever experienced. They didn't just ignore me. They had perfected the art of looking right through me. My hurt, my truth, my very existence was nothing more than an inconvenient bit of static they could easily tune out. The call ended with a chorus of "I love yous" between my parents and Victoria. My mother blew a kiss to the screen. "Talk to you tomorrow, sweetie," she chirped to Victoria. Then, as an afterthought, her eyes flicked to my window for a fraction of a second. "Good night, Madison." It was flat, dismissive. It wasn't a good night. It was a dismissal. Victoria waved a perfectly manicured hand. My father gave a curt nod. Then their screens went black, one by one. First Victoria, then my parents, and then it was just me, staring at my own reflection on the dark screen of my laptop. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with all the words I had never been allowed to say. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, felt like a cage. The air was thin, hard to breathe. I sat there, unmoving, for a long time. My hands were still, shaking, a fine tremor I couldn't control. My heart was pounding a dull, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Finally, I closed the laptop. The quiet click echoed in the room. It felt like closing a casket. The casket of the daughter I had tried so hard to be for 27 years. The good, quiet, understanding daughter. The daughter who swallowed her own pain to keep the peace. The daughter who worked tirelessly, hoping that one day her effort would be enough. She was gone. They had killed her tonight with their casual cruelty and their absolute refusal to see me. They had snuffed her out as easily as blowing out a candle. And in the darkness that was left, something new, something cold and hard was beginning to form. I wasn't sad anymore. The numbness was receding, and underneath it wasn't grief. It was a terrifying, crystal-clear clarity. The conversation wasn't over because my father had ended it. It was over because it had never really begun. You can't have a conversation with people who have already decided you're not worth listening to. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through the quiet dark of my apartment, a ghost in my own home. I made tea I didn't drink. I stared out the window at the sleeping city, the distant lights like cold, unblinking eyes. The numbness from the call had given way to a deep, profound ache that settled in my bones. It was the accumulated pain of a lifetime of being second best, of being the practical one, the afterthought. Every small slight, every casual dismissal, every time I'd been compared to Victoria and found lacking. It all came flooding back, not as individual memories, but as a single, crushing wave. I remembered being 7 and showing my mother a drawing I'd made. She'd taped it to the fridge, but in a corner, underneath one of Victoria's gold-starred spelling tests. I remembered my dad teaching Victoria how to drive in his prized sedan while telling me to practice in our beat-up minivan because I was less coordinated. I remembered them missing my college honor society induction because it was the same weekend as Victoria's law school meet and greet. At the time, they were just small hurts, paper cuts I'd learned to ignore. But now I saw them for what they were, 1,000 tiny wounds that had finally bled me dry. The tears came, but they weren't the hot, angry tears I had expected. They were quiet, cold, and utterly exhausted. I curled up on my sofa, wrapping a blanket around myself, and cried for the family I deserved, but would never have. I cried for the little girl who just wanted her dad to be proud of her. I cried for the young woman who just wanted her mother to see her. I cried until there were no tears left, and all that remained was a hollow, empty space inside my chest. And in that hollow space, a single thought took root and began to grow. They don't want the truth. They didn't cut me off because they were angry. They cut me off because my truth, the truth about my sacrifices, my struggles, my quiet contributions, was a threat to the simple, convenient narrative they had built. In their story, Victoria was the hero, the successful and generous daughter who showered them with gifts. They were the proud, loving parents who had raised such a star. And I was the supporting character, the quiet, slightly disappointing one whose role was to be grateful and not cause trouble. My reality, the fact that I was propping up their own mother's health, that my lesser career was one of service and sacrifice, that I was financially responsible in a way Victoria never had to be, shattered that narrative. It made things complicated. It introduced shades of gray into their black and white world. It might have forced them to acknowledge their own unfairness, their own neglect, and that was something they were simply unwilling to do. It was easier to call me a liar. It was easier to call me dramatic. It was easier to silence me. Sometime before dawn, as the first gray light began to filter through my window, the crying stopped, the aching subsided, and what was left was a cold, hard resolve. I had spent my entire life chasing their approval, bending myself into shapes that might be more pleasing to them, hoping that one day they would finally see me. It was a futile effort. It was like begging for warmth from a block of ice. I finally understood. You can't get water from a stone. You can't get love from people who are incapable of giving it. All you can do is stop trying. All you can do is walk away and find your own water, your own warmth. My family didn't value my love. They didn't value my sacrifice. The only thing they understood was money. Victoria's money made her good. My lack of it made me useless. It was a brutally simple equation. Fine, I thought, a strange sense of calm washing over me. If that's the only language they speak, then that's the language I'll use. Not to win their love. I knew now that was impossible. But to protect myself, to protect my grandmother. My revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation. They called my truth drama, so I would give them the opposite. I would give them silence, a deliberate, methodical, and financially binding silence. I would quietly remove myself from their equation. I would take what I had, my money, my care, my future, and redirect it. I would build a fortress around myself and the one person who had always loved me unconditionally. And I would let my parents, with their perfect daughter, face their own reality without my safety net. The breaking point wasn't a shatter. It was a quiet, firm click, like a lock sliding into place. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a steely determination. I called in sick to work, something I almost never did. But this was a different kind of emergency, a different kind of life-saving procedure. This one was for me. I spent the entire day at my kitchen table with my laptop, not in a flurry of emotion, but with the calm, methodical focus of a nurse assessing a critical patient. I wasn't just Madison Greene, the hurt daughter, anymore. I was a strategist, My first step was my grandmother. My secret payments to the pharmacy were a temporary fix, a bandage on a bigger problem. It left her vulnerable. If something happened, to me, that support would vanish. If my parents ever found out, they could try to interfere. I needed a permanent, legally sound solution. I spent hours researching, typing phrases like elder care financial planning, protecting assets for seniors, and irrevocable trusts. By noon, I knew what I had to do. I found a highly rated law firm in Denver that specialized in estate planning and elder law. I booked a consultation for the following week, my next day off. Next, I turned my attention to my own finances, to the invisible threads that still connected me to my parents. I logged into my bank accounts. I was a co-signer on one of my mother's credit cards, an in case of emergencies arrangement we'd set up years ago. I'd never once thought about it. Now, it felt like a liability, a backdoor they could use to create a crisis I'd be expected to solve. I found the form online, filled it out, and digitally submitted my request to be removed from the account. The confirmation email arrived minutes later. The first thread was cut. Then came the bigger, more symbolic ties. I pulled up the documents for my life insurance policy, a benefit through my job at the hospital. I had listed my parents as the primary beneficiaries when I first started, without giving it a second thought. Who else would I list? Staring at their names on the screen, Robert and Cynthia Greene felt wrong. They didn't deserve to benefit from my life when they barely participated in it. And they certainly didn't deserve to benefit from my death. With a few clicks, I changed the primary beneficiary to the trust I was planning to create for my grandmother. The secondary beneficiary, I named a charity for animal welfare. It was done. Finally, my retirement account, my 401k. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was mine, built from every long shift and every double I'd ever worked. Like my life insurance, my parents were listed as the beneficiaries. I changed that too, mirroring the new arrangement. First the trust, then the charity. With each change, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. These weren't acts of anger. They were acts of liberation. I was reclaiming my life, my future, my resources. I was deciding, for the first time, who was worthy of my care. It was a quiet declaration of independence, signed and sealed in the II digital world. The following Tuesday, I walked into the law office. It was an intimidating place, all dark wood and leather chairs. But the lawyer, a woman named Ms. Albright, was warm and professional. She listened patiently as I laid out the situation. I didn't cry or get angry. I just stated the facts. My grandmother's financial needs, my desire to provide for her long-term, and my wish to ensure my parents could not access or control the funds. She didn't judge me. She just nodded, her expression understanding. "You're doing a very wise and compassionate thing, Ms. Greene," she said, her words a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still open. To be seen, to be validated by a complete stranger, was more affirmation than my own family had given me in a decade. She explained the process of creating an irrevocable trust for my grandmother's benefit. It would protect the money for her care, ensuring it could only be used for her medical bills, living expenses, and well-being. Once the money was in the trust, it was untouchable by anyone else, including my parents. I didn't hesitate. "Let's do it," I said. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Ms. Albright to finalize the paperwork. I transferred the majority of my personal savings into the trust, leaving just enough for my own emergency fund. I set up an automatic transfer from my paycheck to go directly into the trust account each month. It was the same amount I had been paying to the pharmacy and then some, now formalized and protected. The day I signed the final documents in her office, I felt a profound sense of peace. The fortress was built. My grandmother was safe. I was safe. I had created a new kind of family, a legal and financial bond based on genuine love and care, not on obligation or guilt. My revenge was complete, and it wasn't vengeful at all. It was the simple, quiet act of choosing who deserved my love and building a world where that love could not be taken for granted. For 6 weeks, my life was quiet, blissfully quiet. My mother sent a few passive-aggressive texts, mostly photos of Victoria's lavish life with captions like, "Some of us are having fun," which I ignored. There were no more family Zoom calls. The silence was a relief, a clean, open space where I could finally breathe. I focused on my work, started a new certification program, and spent my days off hiking with my dog or having long, peaceful phone calls with my grandmother, who was sounding more relaxed and healthier than she had in years. Then, one Friday afternoon, the quiet shattered. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Madison, call me. It's an emergency." My heart hammered against my ribs for a second, old habits dying hard. My first thought was that something had happened to my dad or my grandmother. Then I remembered, my fortress was built. My grandmother was fine. We had spoken just that morning. This was a different kind of emergency. I took a deep breath, waited a full 10 minutes, and then called her back. She answered on the first ring. "Madison, finally." Her voice was shrill with panic. "Something is wrong with my credit card, the one we use for emergencies. I was at the grocery store and it was declined. Can you believe it? So embarrassing. I remained perfectly calm. I'm sure it was, Mom. Well, can you call the company and sort it out? They wouldn't talk to me. Said I wasn't the primary account holder to make changes. I can't sort it out, I said, my voice even and steady. I'm not on that account anymore. I had my name removed a few weeks ago. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. You what? Why on earth would you do that? What if we have an emergency? That card was my emergency backup, Mom, not yours, I said simply. I decided to organize my finances. You'll have to rely on your own emergency funds. But Victoria sent us that money, she sputtered. We used it to book a cruise. We thought we still had the credit card for regular things. I almost laughed. Their emergency was that they had spent my sister's $10,000 on a vacation and were now unable to pay for their groceries. The lack of foresight was staggering. That sounds like a problem you'll have to discuss with Dad or Victoria, I said. I have to go. I'm heading into work. Before she could protest, I heard my father's voice in the background, muffled but angry. Give me the phone. He came on the line, his voice booming with indignation. Madison, what is the meaning of this? You turn your back on your own family? After everything we've done for you? What have you done for me, Dad? I asked, and the question was genuine. I wasn't being sarcastic. I was truly asking, what had they done other than provide the basic food and shelter required by law, all while making me feel like a second-class citizen in my own home? He was clearly taken aback. He stammered for a moment before recovering. We raised you. We gave you a roof over your head. And this is the thanks we get? You abandon us when we need you? I'm not abandoning anyone, I said, and my voice was as clear and steady as a surgeon's hand. My resources are being used where they are most needed and most appreciated. What is that supposed to mean? He demanded. This was the moment to finally tell them the truth, not as a desperate plea to be heard, but as a simple statement of fact. It means I already give, just not to you, I said. Grandma is taken care of. Her medical bills, her prescriptions, everything. I set up a trust to ensure she will be looked after for the rest of her life. That's what matters to me. That's where my money goes. The silence that followed was more profound than any I had ever heard. It wasn't an angry silence. It was a complete, hollow void. I had checkmated them. They couldn't argue that. Their mother's health wasn't important. They couldn't accuse me of being selfish when I was single-handedly funding her care. They couldn't demand that money for themselves without looking like the monsters they were. My quiet, practical actions had stripped them of all their weapons, their guilt, their manipulations, their accusations. Finally, my mother's voice came back on the line, small and weak. You've been paying for her? For years, I confirmed. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Dad. I ended the call. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I had said my piece. I turned my phone on silent, put it in my locker, and walked onto the floor of the emergency room, leaving them alone in the quiet rubble of the world they had built. Resolution, poetic justice. In the months that followed, I found a peace I had never known. The absence of my family's drama was like the absence of a chronic, low-grade fever I hadn't even realized I was suffering from until it was gone. I was lighter. I smiled more. My work felt more fulfilling because it was a choice, not an escape. My relationship with my grandmother blossomed. With the financial stress gone, she seemed younger, more vibrant. We talked on the phone every day and had dinner together every Sunday, conversations filled with laughter and stories, not whispered worries. My family's favoritism, however, built on the unstable foundation of money and appearances, began to crumble. My parents, in a panic over their finances, turned to their golden child. But Victoria, who had always enjoyed being the celebrated hero, had no interest in being the sole financial provider. Her generosity had been a performance, predicated on the idea that I was the silent, practical safety net. When her $10,000 gifts were no longer for fun things like cruises, but for paying the mortgage or the electricity bill, they lost their shine. My grandmother told me in a sad but steady voice that the arguments between my parents and Victoria were becoming frequent and bitter. Victoria resented their constant neediness. My parents resented her resentment. The perfect family portrait had cracked, revealing the ugly truth underneath. Their relationships were transactional. Without my silent support balancing the scales, the entire system collapsed. I chose dignity over begging for a love that was never really there. I built a life for myself, a small, quiet, but sturdy life, based on real affection and mutual respect. I learned that family isn't just about the people who share your blood, it's about the people who see your worth. 1. Afternoon. Sitting in a sunny cafe with my grandmother, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. It was a long, rambling paragraph about how they missed me and how families should stick together. It was a half-hearted, manipulative attempt at an apology that never actually used the word sorry. A year ago, that text would have sent me into a spiral of hope and anxiety. Now, I just looked at it, took a sip of my coffee, and deleted the message without replying. I looked across the table at my grandmother, who was smiling at me, her eyes clear and full of a love that needed no explanation. I smiled back. I was finally completely free. Have you ever been compared to a sibling in the harshest way? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, survival, and poetic justice, because sometimes silence is worth more than 10K.